So I guess I'll think of your example. I'll take your example of someone like cutting you off, right? Maybe that's a place we can go from with this. The way that the way that I think about that is I don't know if we're in like a crappy mood, we wake up on the wrong side of the bed, if that then attracts that car cutting us off, or if it's more so about the car cuts us off and how we respond is actually what creates our life, right? So I think that something that can come about in this idea of law of attraction and I'm creating my life is like if something happens to me that's uncomfortable or an inconvenience or painful or then I did this to myself versus like life is happening and then how we choose to respond is where the most of our power is, which then I do believe starts to create how should I say, it's like a ripple effect from those decisions, right? So the example I'll take, as I just said, is the car, someone cutting you off. If my response is, oh my gosh, maybe they just like totally forgot their exit was coming up. Or I once had a mentor who said to me, if you just imagine that everyone who cut you off was like rushing to find a bathroom because number two was about to happen and it was like the end of the world, how would you respond? And it's like, I might just be like, yeah, absolutely, like, go. I don't want that to happen to you. Just go. So if I choose to respond that way, now I'm going to show up in the next interaction. For example, I go to a coffee shop. The way that I enter into that space is of a lighter, positive energy, which is, yes, then going to be who I start to connect with and attract with, and my energy is going to radiate and magnetize to me. And it's also going to affect how I've then interact with, the barista. Let's just say in that moment, they're really busy and maybe made a mistake on my order. If I'm in the energy of like, oh, that person cut me off, and now this barista is like got my order wrong, this starts to create my life and starts to magnetize to me because it's what I'm perceiving. It's my filter that I'm looking through, that everything is an inconvenience and people aren't paying attention. But if I'm like, oh my gosh, they're so busy, no problem. I totally get it. I'll wait. I have a couple minutes for you to get my order right. Then I start to see, I'm looking through the lens of like, people are doing their best and there must be a really good reason for why everybody's being the way that they're being. And so what it does, it creates our inner tone of energy and vibration that ultimately is better for our health. Because when I'm like, I'm in a contracted state, I might go into fight or flight, which in and of itself is creating a distribution of hormones in the body that, when distributed constantly, can be detrimental to the body and like the tissues. But why I say that is it's really like the way I'm choosing to respond starts to release certain chemicals from our brain. I once heard someone say that our brain is our pharmacy. So it's like, do I want the good feeling hormones or the ones that make me feel kind of tense and uncomfortable and cranky? And so by the way that I'm responding, I start to create interactions in my life that then either allow me to feel good or not feel good and continue to allow me to then release good feeling hormones or not, which creates my inner state. And then it becomes this whole, it's just like a cycle. So that's how I would see that.
That sounds uber complex, but it's something that I would imagine you don't even think about because it's your everyday life. It's what makes it's your DNA, right? It happens naturally. Like you try not to think about that way. I mean, because the basic way that someone would try to explain that from the normie perspective, if you will, from the person who doesn't know anything, it's optimism. But that's not simply optimism. I mean, I'm sure optimism is a part of it, but you're speaking of something that where you're kind of molding your soul and attracting the energy that you want. So it's not just optimism. Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say. I love that you're actually bringing that back. I think there's optimism there, but there's also the power of our potential power for us to choose and create each moment, right? So when there's optimism there, which is like I'm choosing to see life and people through this lens, which doesn't mean that I don't see what's happening. Like if someone's being really just like out of line, like I'm not delusional and be like, oh yeah, they're amazing. It like see things for what they are, and when possible, choose the optimism, choose to sort of believe in the best is happening until you're shown something else, if you're not ready for it, and then advocate the fact that we have the power to create the next moment and to choose how we interact. So even if someone is being really rude, and then instead of being like, this delusional optimist, like, oh, like it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of being like, okay, here's how I could choose to respond to this from an empowered place, which would be maybe I need to set a boundary with this person, like,
Mhm.
hey, this energy, like this kind of conversation is not okay
Yeah.
here. Um, I'm going to ask that we separate. I'm going to ask that you give me space. That's okay too, because you're taking care of yourself. But it's the way in which I do it, right? Like if I start name calling
Mhm.
and like being a certain way, being violent, that's also a choice. So I can choose to be strong and firm with myself and see what's happening. And then I also can choose to then later be like, you know what, that probably had nothing to do with me. Is there something I
Yeah.
need to like learn about myself? Maybe there was something that I need to learn about myself,
Mhm.
which is still being empowered enough to learn about life. What is life teaching me? And then if I've like done the work and I'm like, you know what, I think
Mhm.
that I showed up. I really feel like I showed up in my best self. And so perhaps this was just a person having a really bad day. I don't need to make this personal or stay attached to it. I can choose to let it go now. So it's all about choice and being empowered in the decisions that we're making.
That's so interesting because also when you said how you choose to react, also if you choose to react with anger or frustration, you're also now carrying the weight of that on your spirit, right? Because now you're in a bad mood, now you're grumpy, now you're frustrated, and now maybe a loved one is gonna tease you like they probably always do, but now because of that anger that you're carrying from that earlier interaction, now you may lash out against them. When they had nothing to do with it.
Right.
They're just teasing you like they always do. Like, what Maria, like I always tease you like this. Why are you snapping on me now? And it's because of the earlier interaction that you had with so and so, and you were aware of it, but instead of just dismissing them, you kind of maybe insulted them, and now you're carrying that with you. Because I've never had an interaction where I responded with an insult or even violence. I've never had an interaction where after it I felt like just free from it. It still lingered even after the
Mm,
fact. It lingered with
mhm.
me even after the person was out of my circle. Maybe they were thinking about something else totally, but now it's still lingering with me. That I had
Yeah.
to react in a more confrontational manner.
Yeah, and it's so good to have that awareness. And I think you're right. I've had the same experience. I don't usually feel like, oh, I'm just free from that moment. And I've had experiences like that too, where it just sticks. And so, what I think it's all kind of about being responsible, which is then
Mhm.
if I notice that, then, and let's say you did tease me and I was like, "Ah," and I got a certain
Yeah,
way, then we have a choice again because it's not about being perfect. We're going to be human, right? And
yeah,
this is where I used to put a lot of pressure on myself, and I think that once we start to do the work, perhaps that can happen, but it's not about the perfection. It's about being human and doing our best and then meeting the moment. So if I did lash back out, that and I see that like, oh, I was out of line, it might look like, hey, please forgive me for the way I just reacted. I can tell I need some space because I
yeah,
had a weird interaction this afternoon and I'm taking it out on you. Right. So sometimes it's difficult to do if we're attached to being right and attached
mhm,
to not being vulnerable, if we're like trying to be tough and self protective. But that's what really allows moments to flow and moments to mend much more quickly, which is like, please forgive me. That had nothing to do with you. I'm going to go take some space because I can tell I didn't clear this
mhm,
experience from earlier. Or it means coming back into a space and being like, I know you love me and I know you're just teasing me from a good place, but I'm feeling really sensitive because this thing happened. And so I'm just
mhm,
not in a space for joking and like being picked on.
yeah,
Like we have the, and so those are the choices. And it's getting in, how do we do that? We get in touch with ourselves
mhm,
and yeah, we get attuned to what's here. And when I'm attuned to what's here, then I can more easily show up in a space with someone else and navigate that experience. So it's not about pretending that didn't happen. It's not about like trying to spin it into optimism if it still feels shitty.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
about being true and honest in the moment.